Picard season 3. Like, it's great. It's a completely different thing. You know, I can't believe how good it is. And I was like,
I'm going to be talking about Picard season 3, episode 1, because, oh my God, it
gives it to him. It gives him great storylines. It gives Jonathan Frakes a chance to actually act.
I guess, spoiler, it started out good, but didn't I say that about last season?
You know, the older crew coming back and getting to contribute to this 25th century one last time in a meaningful way. I just think it's beautiful, you know.
It's like, this is what we've been waiting for. This honestly felt like a pilot episode for an entire series.
Episode 1 is Star Trek The Wrath of Khan, the TV series.
Is that it? Is that really all it takes? All the terrible things that new Star Trek has given us, and all it takes to win people back over is a few familiar sights and sounds, and a slight improvement over the worst thing ever made for television, Season 1 and Season 2 of Star Trek Picard. A recycled story, terrible characterization and world building. But some people have been won over. Sometimes I find myself asking, is this all just a practical joke of some sort? That's a silly idea, I know, but let me present an argument. Here is something that Mike Stoklasa says.
There's a secret power source that's only for the holodeck. And I thought that was such a great idea. And then I'm like, why is Picard using the holodeck? They're desperate for power.
That is such a stupid idea. The ship literally turns off life support. They even turn off the warning beacon telling them that they've turned off life support because they have a desperate need for energy immediately, all of the energy. And yet they're still working the holodecks. And yet they have this sort of energy on the ship that produces plenty of energy, it produces enough for the holodeck, and they just can't use it. They can't redirect it to where it's actually needed, where it might be able to save the ship. This brilliant idea that Mike likes could easily have got everybody killed. And I know where this idea comes from. It's originally from Star Trek Voyager. In Voyager, they were at the far end of the galaxy, meaning that they didn't have immediate access to refueling, or to any sort of new energy reserves. So they ended up rationing energy. They rationed even food replicators. The problem is that Star Trek does a lot of holodeck episodes, and the Voyager writers wanted to be able to do the same thing. So they just decided that the holodecks had a power source, and their own power source, which was not in any way interoperable with the rest of the ship. Voyager over the years in the Delta Quadrant integrates technology from many other species, from the Borg, from the people who gave them the quantum slipstream. They even integrate technology from their own selves 20 years in the future. The only thing that they can't plug and play into Voyager is its own holodeck. This is one of the stupidest ideas from old Star Trek. And this is the idea that Terry Matalas chose to bring into Star Trek Picard Season 3. But there's another reference, a reference which Mike Stoklasa makes. Another episode where they had an energy shortage, and they also had a holodeck operating. But in that episode, an energy shortage means that the Enterprise automatically shuts down the holodecks, even though Geordi is running an important simulation in one of them, and he has to go to Picard and get his personal authorization to reactivate the holodecks.
Energy reserves reaching critical stage. Standard procedure requires termination of all simulations. Override authority restricted.
What?
Mike Stoklasa mentions this episode, but he doesn't mention the holodeck angle. And then he thinks this new version is brilliant. It's ridiculous. And for someone who knows as much about Star Trek as he does and who explicitly brings up this episode in this context, it's really hard to believe that he's being serious here. This ridiculous idea is what Mike thinks is brilliant. But this video isn't about criticising other people for liking Star Trek Picard, no matter how wrong they might be. This is about criticising Star Trek Picard itself. So first, I'm not falling for any aesthetic changes based on ransacking Wrath of Khan. I noticed the red alert sound.
Security breach, hull damage, unauthorized...
I noticed the whistle. I noticed the music. I noticed Dr. Crusher's jacket. I noticed the font. I noticed all this stuff, and it doesn't matter. We all know it's ripping off Wrath of Khan. That doesn't make it good writing, because the far more important things are character and world building, especially in such a long-established franchise as Star Trek is. Let's talk about 7 of 9. Let's talk about this stupid speech that she gives.
trust my instincts, bring justice to an unjust universe, the way that you do. How am I supposed to just ignore my gut, ignore my instincts, just to follow orders?
Because I never did.
Picard. This is Picard Season 3. This is Picard in Picard Season 3. So some of the 7 problems come from Season 1 and Season 2. Star Trek Picard 7 of 9 is in no way related to 7 of 9 from Star Trek Voyager. The 7 of 9 from Star Trek Voyager might well have been the first officer of a Starfleet starship by this point. The 7 of 9 who was a Fenris Ranger in Season 1 of Star Trek Picard would obviously not be in a Starfleet. The problem is that here we have both 7 of 9s. 7 of 9 is the first officer of a major Starfleet starship, but she's also a rebel and a rogue who doesn't understand the concept of following orders or the chain of command. The problem is that the 7 of 9, who was a Fenris Ranger, would never have rejoined Starfleet and got to this position. She could give a crazy speech about not understanding orders, and it wouldn't matter. Meanwhile, the 7 of 9 who would have got into this position would have perfectly understood the concept of following orders. She was a Borg. She didn't even have a concept of free will for most of her life. And then she joined the crew of Voyager and was part of a Starfleet chain of command for several years. But to find her here just not understanding the chain of command, despite being a first officer, that's a pretty big writing problem. And then we see her here watching someone punch another officer in the face. Remember when she could do a nerve pinch? That will come in handy now. But that was a different 7 of 9. And then there's Captain Shaw, a frustratingly inconsistent character. Initially he seems to be by the book, but later on he seems to be more of a coward. He wants to hand over Jack to the supposed bounty hunters, and then suddenly changes his mind when he finds out that Jack is Picard's son.
Because he's my son. God damn it.
Tactical full.
He explicitly doesn't like Picard, or Riker for that matter, but he's willing to risk almost certain destruction of his ship to save someone because that person is the son of a man that he doesn't like and has never met before. And that's easily the biggest problem with that character. He doesn't want to hand over Jack, specifically because Jack is the son of Picard, even though he doesn't like Picard, even though his own innate nature of doing things by the book means he should in fact hand him over. And then there's Dr. Crusher. Dr. Crusher, who now enjoys vaporizing people with a pump-action phaser. Don't get me started on the pump-action phaser. Initially, I thought this wouldn't be a problem. I mean, we haven't seen her in 20, 25 years at this point. She could have easily had experiences that made her become hardened and more inclined to murder people. Even though, the last time we saw her, she was the same as she was in The Next Generation. At which point she got kidnapped on at least one occasion, and immediately just offered to provide medical attention to her kidnappers. That's the sort of character that she was. But she could have changed, except that we find out that she was just doing basically the same thing until about a week ago, and that was when they started getting attacked. So she decided to stop vaporizing people in like a week. And there's Jack Crusher, Picard, whatever. He actually doesn't really have a lot of characterization. But he does speak with an English accent, which is a pretty bad idea, because that has to be hereditary. He's never spoken to Picard before. He was raised by Crusher in the Star Trek space environment where pretty much everyone speaks with an American accent. So the only way he can really have developed an English accent like that is because it's hereditary, because Picard speaks with an English accent. That's really pretty stupid. It reminds me of Star Trek Nemesis, where the clone of Captain Picard was bald, because he was bald. They even re-established that by showing, in Nemesis, a photo of Picard as a young man, completely bald, even though we've seen Picard as a younger man back in the Tapestry in The Next Generation, and at that time he had plenty of hair. But the writers think that the audience are stupid, so Picard is bald. Picard speaks with an English accent. If you want to show young Picard, if you want to show the clone of Picard, if you want to show the child of Picard, then baldness, an English accent, whatever you want that's established with Picard suddenly becomes a genetic, hereditary characteristic. And then Picard. He gets his name on this rubbish, and he gets his character sabotaged. Obviously there's his sudden decision that he doesn't like orders. There's also his plan for getting to Beverly Crusher, which involves going onto the Titan where the captain is someone that he doesn't know and has no reason to believe will be fond of him, and casually dropping into conversation that he would like to go somewhere, apparently expecting that the captain would jump at the opportunity to take him there.
No.
No. We pivot.
Short of mutiny, I'm at a loss.
Amazingly, this plan doesn't work, so Picard has to go to plan B, which is lying in a bunk bed and complaining with Riker about how old they are. Picard and Riker, of course, both have innovative military strategies named after them, the Picard Maneuver and the Riker Maneuver. And then there's the episode where Picard tries to get Riker to attack the enemy, even though they're massively outgunned. It's extremely reckless and violent for Captain Picard, and it also turns out to be a very bad idea that leads to the Titan shooting itself with several photon torpedoes and almost kills everybody on board. Out of character, but the writers needed the plot to go there, so that's what happens. You know, Ruffian Wolf, they're doing okay. That's not a bad storyline. Although the start of that storyline doesn't really make sense. Raffi searching the ship's computer for the Red Lady. She asks the computer if there's a ship called the Red Lady, and it gives her the information that there is a Romulan covert operative called the Red Lady, who died in somewhat mysterious circumstances only a few months ago at about the time that this operation was starting. Seems like an obvious suspect to me, although I don't know why the computer told her about this operative when she asked for the names of spaceships. But it did, and she completely ignores that information. Instead, she decides that the Red Lady must be a pink statue of Rachel Garrett from yesterday's Enterprise. She also realises that the whole thing isn't being operated by a specific rogue Romulan, because it wouldn't make any sense for the Romulan to attack a minor Starfleet recruitment post after stealing such an incredibly powerful doomsday device.
World-ending portal tech and uses it to blow up, of all things, a mid-level Starfleet recruitment bureau?
Of course, it also doesn't make any sense for anyone else to steal something like that, and then attack a nice minor target like a Starfleet recruitment outpost. But I dare say that'll never come up again. Why would the Dominion target a minor Starfleet recruitment outpost? Nothing immediately comes to mind. At one point, Jack tries to hand himself over to the enemy. Heroic, very, very self-sacrificial and so forth. The problem is that he tries to do it by breaking out of his cell and beaming himself over, even though he could have just gone to the captain and said, "I volunteer to be handed over. I don't mind being extradited."
He's trying to hand himself over in the event that we wouldn't.
But he's still got... Again, it doesn't really make sense, but it does serve the plot. So basically all of the main characters are inconsistent with themselves in this series and with their previous characterization, and act in ways that don't make sense but do serve the interests of the plot. A good hallmark of very lazy writing. Now we get onto the real nerd shit. Me, as a massive Star Trek fan, I notice all of these inconsistencies with established Star Trek lore, and now I'm going to tell you about them. So here's one. Why does no one use communications anymore? Whether it's Shaw heading to the bridge, or Raffi heading to a potential terrorist attack, why does no one just think, we can communicate? We can do that now, we've got mobile telephones. Why do I always forget this? Here's another one. If every single ship in the fleet can go warp 9.99, and does so by default, then maybe they should do the all good things thing, and have a new warp scale. The refit of the Titan is a Neo-Constitution class ship. It's the Titan A. The thing is that a refit doesn't turn it into a different class of ship, and the Enterprise A was the Enterprise A because it wasn't actually the same ship as the original Enterprise. It wasn't the refit, it was the replacement ship. Riker says that the Titan is weak because it's an exploratory ship. The problem is that all Starfleet ships are exploratory ships. They're also very heavily armed normally, just not dedicated warships. So why are Starfleet exploratory vessels suddenly so incredibly weak? Why does no one come looking for the Titan after it gets trapped in that nebula? It is meant to be getting to a specific place at a specific time. Starfleet should probably be figuring out that something's gone wrong and come looking for it. Who is the second officer on the Titan? Because when Shaw is incapacitated and Seven is suspended, he appoints Riker as the captain. This should be the second officer, as it was in the episode Chain of Command, and the episode where there is the tachyon net. In both cases, Data is a second officer. Data is the second officer of the Enterprise D, and he therefore becomes the first officer when Riker is suspended. So where is the Titan second officer? Why is Riker, a retired captain, put in charge instead? And why Riker instead of Picard when Picard outranks Riker, although they're both retired? And when Picard attempted to seize control of the ship only a few scenes earlier? Obviously, because they've written that into the plot, they need to get there. They didn't want to think too much about how to do that. And then there are the workings of nebulae. Nebulae used to mean shields and sensors were ineffective. That doesn't really seem to be the case anymore, although their sensors seem to be weaker. Also, why was the Helios not in the nebula hiding when the Titan arrived? Or if it was, how were they tracked? And how were they scanned by the Titan? How did the Titan come to help with shields and with warp drive? When the Titan gets trapped in the nebula and is unable to escape, why did they not just head towards the gravity well? Why did they not slingshot around it or investigate the nebula itself for possible resources? Why did they not spot the energy waves and use them as a power source earlier than they did? I know, of course, that these things do eventually happen, but I don't want, as a viewer, to watch for an episode or two just wondering when are they going to figure out what I already know.
You're on the chain of command in the afterlife. But from what I've heard, history remembers you with one less pip.
Admirals don't have pips. They have a chevron-based rank insignia system.
Good afternoon. I believe it is afternoon in Sol System.
There is not a specific time in the Sol System. The Sol System has multiple planets, and planets have different time zones. It isn't afternoon at every place on Earth at the same time. This is pretty basic stuff. I feel like they should have spotted this one.
I'll lower my shield so that you can scan my ship.
Star Trek has always been able to scan through shields. This scene doesn't make any sense. Changelings, of course, don't need to sit in a bucket for a few hours every day to regain their energy.
After a while, it becomes too difficult to maintain your solid shape.
Odo does in Deep Space Nine because he is a young and inexperienced changeling. That is not the case with most changelings. Changelings are also incredibly fast and strong. You can't tie them up with a bit of rope because they can change their shape. They can also escape from a room very quickly. When Cisco finds out that one of his crew members is a changeling, he points a phaser at him and tries to shoot him, but by the time he brings the gun around, the changeling has already escaped through an air vent. So no, you can't hold one captive and wait for it to lose the ability to hold its form, for several different reasons. So those are my main criticisms so far. The characters don't make sense, the plot doesn't make sense, and it's horribly inconsistent with the universe which has previously been established, both in the original Star Trek series and also in New Trek. Aesthetically, it certainly ripped off Wrath of Khan to a reasonably efficient degree, but it still has the nasty New Trek touches, like forgetting that there can be lights in spaceships. Now, don't get me wrong, it's a massive improvement on the last two seasons of Star Trek Picard, but it's no better than Strange New Worlds, and is a significant downgrade on anything before Star Trek 2009. So I suppose people probably just think this is good because, well, everything else has been terrible recently. But that's not really an excuse, and this is still objectively very, very bad indeed.
Shut it, Will.
Metaphasic shields at the ready.
Sensors optimal and standing by for...
Metaphasic? Are we flying through a star or something?
Galarian fever is fatal at the rate of 1 life per minute. So while we've been at this,
Well, that's not how death rates work. That's going to depend on how many people have been infected, how far it's spread. You can't just say the disease kills one person every minute or whatever.
Come on, anybody would think it was heavy.
Hey, remember when Star Trek had anti-gravity sleds for moving things around? I really miss Star Trek.
The Borg have maintained their position, waiting for us to come out of hiding.
So this whole thing is just to set up that there's going to be a nebula in this series.
Subspace frequency myriad codec.
Codecs are passwords in this, apparently.
And other prohibited cargo.
currency is currency and medicine isn't free.
Yes, it is. Medicine is free. You just walk over to the replicator, ask for some medicine, computer will give it to you. I mean, you're human. Money doesn't even exist for humans.